Well, hi everybody. So today I'll be going over Lionheart Creation's Skylark. We'll kind of hop in the cockpit here in a second, have a look at it, get it started, go fly it around for a second, and then do a short review on it. And that'll pretty much be it for today, so let's go ahead and get started here. Alrighty, well here we are in the Skylark, which I will admit always reminds me of a Buick. This certainly doesn't look like a Buick, but that is what it reminds me of. Now the overall look in here is actually pretty good. I don't really have any complaints on how it looks. The wood panel I actually think came out really nice. Now the interior of the cockpit here is going to change depending upon which livery you have chosen. So this is what the red one looks like. The yellow one's going to be a little bit different, so on and so forth for all the different liveries that you have. The only real problem that I have noticed in here is that sometimes the camera kind of intersects the sort of this bar back here at the back. But other than that, that's really the only thing I noticed in here. It will kind of happen to the canopy as well, but that's not really that big of a deal. You pretty much have to look straight up to notice it. So we're going to go ahead and run through the features here, get this thing started, and go take it off and fly it around for a second. Alrighty, well, as far as the features go, we can open the door and close the door. Also open and close the canopy. Now the radio, which normally is not something I mentioned in the features, but it is kind of hidden here in the glove box. The rest of the features are pretty much going to be contained over here on the left side of the cockpit here. And you can hit left control and 3 to get into this camera view. We have an autopilot, which is really pretty simple. It's just going to hold your heading and it's going to hold your altitude. So get to whatever heading you want, altitude, and then flip all 3 of these switches on. It'll pretty much hold you there. We have the tie-down mode, which is pretty much just going to put a cover over the canopy and put some shocks in. We have a battery door and a fuel truck. Now the fuel truck is quite nicely modeled. It looks pretty good, at least in my opinion. And then we have the battery door here. We'll hop outside the cockpit here and have a look at this. That's pretty much what it looks like. And that's pretty much it for the features, so we'll go ahead and get this thing started and take it off. Alrighty, well, we'll get this thing started. Now, I'm pretty sure by default it's already selected to a tank, so you don't really have to worry about that one. Go ahead and make sure the mixture's up at rich. You can prime it if you want. It's not actually necessary to get this thing going. Go ahead and we'll turn the alternator and the battery on. Now, I will suggest going ahead and turning the panel brightness here up to max. Even during the day, it does seem to make it a little bit easier to read the instruments when you're flying. And then we can come over here to the magnetos. Now, there are, I guess, technically 2 ways to start this thing. We can either come over here once we've got the magnetos set to both, and we can push the starter button, or we can actually just flip the magnetos one more turn, and it'll go ahead and start the engine up for us. Now, I have turned the volume down quite a bit on this one because it is quite loud, but it does sound pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and head out to the runway here and take this thing off. Alrighty, well, we'll go ahead and take this thing off here real quick. There's really not too much to worry about with this one as far as taxiing it or taking it off. It's a pretty well-behaved little plane. It's incredibly stable, barring like a crosswind or something like that. But we'll go ahead and begin throttling it up here. That's going to get going here roundabout, probably about maybe 30 miles an hour. The tail wheel's probably going to lift off the ground here. Really don't have to worry about pulling back on the stick or pushing anything forward. Again, it's pretty well behaved. And once we get to about 50 miles an hour, we'll just go ahead and pull back on the stick a little bit. It'll pretty easily lift off the ground. It has an incredibly low stall speed. So we should go ahead and close the canopy here. Now, as far as how this thing flies, it's pretty fun to fly. It has a pretty nice roll rate. It will turn an incredibly tight circle, and it will maintain a pretty high speed in that circle. It is actually maybe a little bit surprising. It really does like to climb, and it does climb pretty well. At least, I guess, for its time period, it's pretty fast. You're looking at something like 140 miles an hour maybe out of it for top speed. Cruising speed is going to be somewhere around like 120 to 125. And I will say that you probably are going to have to trim the nose down quite a bit. It does really like to climb, so keep that one in mind. As far as how it stalls, it's got an okay stall. It will at least dip the wing. It probably won't put you into a spin, but it at least will probably kind of corkscrew you maybe a little bit. Again, it's a pretty easy stall to get out of either way. You probably won't have to use your rudder or anything like that. Stall speed for this one is really pretty low. It's somewhere around about 45 miles an hour, even with the flaps up. Now, there are a few sound effects that are missing in this thing. I'm going to go over those kind of in the review section of this. But as far as the only one that I kind of wanted to mention here is, well, I guess there's two of them. One, the canopy doesn't seem to change the sort of engine, doesn't seem to muffle the engine sound or anything like that when the canopy's closed. And then when you actually do set the plane down, there doesn't seem to be any sort of sound effect from the tires chirping or anything like that. So which sometimes creates a problem because this thing is so easy to land. It lands so gently that sometimes I don't even notice that I've actually touched down. So we'll bring it back around here for a landing. I guess there may be a couple of things that we'll talk about on the way to the runway here. One of which is that the altimeter kind of has this weird problem with it where when the hundreds hand kind of gets to 0, it has a tendency to spin around in a circle, and sometimes the compass behaves like you're in the Bermuda Triangle, but other than that, everything in here seems to work for the most part. Alrighty. Well, we'll want to come in here, I don't know, really, honestly, at pretty much any speed. I mean, this thing is kind of an easy thing to land, but we'll want to be below about 80 miles an hour here. We'll go ahead and put the flaps down. The flaps function a little bit more like an air brake than flaps. We'll still, you know, cut down your stall speed a little bit, but either way, it really drags the plane when you put them down. We'll go ahead and kind of keep our throttle up here just a little bit once the air brake is down. But we're coming in here right about, is that 60 miles an hour right now? We'll want to touch down around about 45 to 50. Again, it does get bounced around pretty bad in the wind, so we'll go ahead and just begin to reduce the throttle here. Back on the stick just a little bit to let it flare, and then already on the ground. Again, there's no sound effect for the tires chirping, so you don't really notice that you're on the ground. Go ahead and just pull the stick back around the tail wheel. And that's pretty much it. It's a really pretty easy plane to land and take off and to fly. It is, again, very well behaved, aside from getting bounced around in the wind pretty bad. Probably not going to have really any problems with it. I will say that crosswinds do make this thing very difficult to keep straight on the runway. So, and it doesn't even require that much of a crosswind. This thing is actually fairly light, and it feels fairly light. So, anyway, that is pretty much it for this, so we'll go ahead and run into the review here, and that'll be pretty much it for today. Alrighty, well, Lionheart Creations Skylark is available in the Microsoft Flight Simulator Marketplace. It's about 15 bucks. You get two variants with it, one of which is a float plane. The short version here is that it's not a complicated plane. There isn't any engine damage or anything like that. It's kind of just neat to look at and fun to fly around. As far as the model goes, it's fine. Everything seems to line up and fit together pretty well, both on the interior and the exterior. The texture quality inside the cockpit is quite nice, and the exterior texturing is nice as well. If you zoom in really close, you might notice a few things. You'll notice the rivets are just a texture, but the default camera distance does a good job of hiding that. Overall, it does look pretty good. Now, as far as the sounds go, they are okay in an overall sense. Most of them are pretty generic. Now, I'm willing to cut Lionheart Creations a little bit of slack here when it comes to the sounds. My reasoning behind this is there is only one of these in the entire world, even though as far as I know it is still airworthy. I could see getting real-world recordings being rather difficult. Either way, the engine sound is the high point of the sound effects, and it is a nice thing to listen to while flying around. There are some missing sound effects, one being that the tires don't chirp when you set down, there isn't any wind sound effect when the canopy is open, and a couple of other things. But in terms of the overall sound quality, there's nothing really wrong with it. The flight model is certainly fun to fly, or at least I've had fun flying it. The flight characteristics differ slightly between the two variants. It's not drastic, but there seems to be a bit of a difference. I'll go through the float version first. It's a bit more sluggish in turns and rolls. It still climbs pretty well, and the speed seems to be about the same, about 125 for cruise, about 140 for top speed, though it will take it longer to get there. The wheeled version is quite aerobatic. It'll do the basics. Some things it does better than others. It's not the pits or anything like that, but it is a pretty decent barnstormer, and for what it is, it's surprisingly quick. You can get it up to about 165 to 170 miles an hour before it'll break. Overall, both of them are pretty responsive to control inputs, though sometimes it can be a bit twitchy. Combine all those things together and you got a pretty fun plane to fly. As far as the features and extras go, it's not bad. I thought the fuel truck was a nice touch, and there are some neat details scattered throughout the plane. You get the same 9 liveries for both variants. They are kind of just color variations on a theme, but they do look good. In conclusion here, it's an aesthetically pleasing plane to look at, it's fun to fly around, and it sounds pretty good. It's pretty easy to hop in and pick up, it's not complicated, there isn't any engine damage or anything like that, and it's not that expensive at about $15. It's a unique plane, and even for the golden age, this one is still pretty unique. And let's be honest, this is probably the closest any of us are ever going to get to flying this thing. And that's pretty much it for today, guys, so thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.